The Galactic Council chamber stretched across 3 miles of gleaming crystal and metal. Representatives from 200 species sat in their designated zones, each area carefully designed to accommodate their unique environmental needs. The Vryn floated in their gravity-free spheres, their translucent bodies pulsing with soft blue light. The Kaltesh warriors stood at attention in their high-temperature zones, their scaled bodies radiating heat that would kill most other species. The Archaeons occupied the central platform, their ancient forms connected to data streams that had existed for millennia. Ambassador Elena Voss stood in the human section, a modest platform near the outer ring. 200 years had passed since humanity made first contact with the galaxy. 200 years of careful diplomacy, measured responses, and quiet observation. The humans had been granted a single seat on the council, the lowest tier of membership. It was more than some species received, but far less than humanity deserved. Elena had learned to ignore the whispers. The other species thought humans were weak. They saw Earth's small registered fleet of 200 warships and concluded that humanity lacked military strength. They observed human reluctance to join offensive campaigns and mistook caution for cowardice. They noticed how humans always voted for diplomatic solutions and assumed it was because they had no other options. Let them think what they want, Elena reminded herself. The truth would reveal itself when the time was right. High Commander Zarketh of the Kaltesh Empire rose from his platform. His voice boomed through the chamber, translated instantly into every language by the Council's quantum processors. The Kaltesh were the oldest warrior race in the galaxy. They had never lost a war. Their empire spanned 50,000 star systems, and their military doctrine had been studied and copied by dozens of other species. The commander's scales rippled with agitation. Elena had learned to read Kaltesh body language over the years. Fear. Raw, primal fear. The holographic display in the center of the chamber flickered to life. Images appeared, showing darkness spreading across the outer rim of the galaxy. Not the darkness of empty space, but something worse, something that consumed light itself. Entire star systems disappeared as Elena watched. Billions of lives snuffed out in moments. The Devourers had arrived. Elena had read the classified reports. The Devourers were unlike any threat the galaxy had faced before. They were not a species in any traditional sense. They were a swarm intelligence, a collective consciousness that spread across entire galaxies like a plague. They consumed everything, planets, stars, even the fabric of space itself. They had destroyed 17 galaxies before reaching this one. 17 galaxies, each containing trillions of lives. The chamber erupted into chaos. Species that had been enemies for centuries suddenly found common cause. The Archaeon luminary Sevquin raised one crystalline appendage and silence fell immediately. The Archaeons were the oldest species in the galaxy. They had witnessed the birth and death of stars. When they spoke, everyone listened. Sevquin's voice resonated through the chamber, not as sound but as pure thought transmitted directly into every mind present. The luminary spoke of mobilization. The Kaltesh would contribute 50,000 warships. The Archaeons would provide 30,000 vessels equipped with their most advanced technology. Other species pledged their fleets. 20,000 from the Iridian Collective, 15,000 from the Shorok Alliance, 10,000 each from a dozen smaller civilizations. The numbers climbed higher. 100,000 warships, the largest armada ever assembled in galactic history. Surely it would be enough. Commander Zarketh turned his burning gaze toward the human section. Elena could feel the condescension in that look. She had seen it countless times before. The commander's voice dripped with false courtesy. Humanity was expected to contribute their entire fleet to the cause. All 200 ships, every vessel they possessed. It was only fair, after all. Every species must do their part, no matter how small. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Some species pitied the humans. Others barely noticed them. 200 ships would make no difference in a fleet of 100,000. But it was the principle that mattered. Even the weakest species must contribute what they could. Elena stood slowly. She smoothed her uniform, a simple black suit that seemed plain compared to the ornate armor and flowing robes worn by other ambassadors. She had worn this uniform to every council session for 5 years. She had listened to speeches and endured insults and kept humanity's secrets locked away. But now the time for secrets had passed. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. She thanked Commander Zarketh for the opportunity to serve. She acknowledged the gravity of the threat they all faced. She spoke of unity and sacrifice and the importance of standing together against extinction. Then she delivered the line she had been rehearsing for 150 years. Humanity would contribute what was necessary, not what others expected, but what was actually needed. Earth had been preparing for this moment since the day they learned they were not alone in the universe. Humans had studied their own history. They had seen what happened when civilizations were caught unprepared. They had learned from thousands of years of warfare on their own planet. They understood that peace was precious, but survival required strength. Elena smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had been underestimated for far too long and was about to prove everyone wrong. Humanity's contribution would arrive at the staging area in Sector 447 within 72 hours. The Council should prepare appropriate docking facilities. They would need far more space than they anticipated. Commander Zarketh laughed. Other Council members joined in. Even the normally stoic Archeons seemed amused. Humans and their delusions of grandeur. It would be entertaining to see their pathetic fleet arrive. 200 ships trying to look impressive among 100,000. Only luminary Sevquin remained silent. The ancient being studied Elena with eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. There was something in the human ambassador's expression, something that did not match her species' reputation for weakness. Sevquin made a mental note to review all available data on human military capabilities. The Archeons had not survived for millions of years by ignoring potential surprises. As the council session ended, Elena returned to her quarters. She activated the quantum communicator that connected directly to Earth. The encryption was unbreakable, using technology that humanity had developed independently. The galaxy thought humans were primitive. They had no idea how wrong they were. Fleet Admiral Marcus Chen appeared on the screen. His face was weathered, his hair gray, his eyes hard with the experience of someone who had spent decades preparing for war. Behind him, Elena could see the bridge of the flagship Indomitable. The ship stretched for miles, bristling with weapons that the galaxy had never seen before. Admiral Chen already knew what Elena was going to say. The order had been anticipated for years. Every simulation had been run, every contingency planned. The entire fleet had been on standby since the moment the Devourers entered the galaxy. Elena gave the order that would change the galaxy forever. 3 words that would shatter every assumption the Council had made about humanity. Activate Protocol Dawn. Admiral Chen nodded once. Behind him, alerts began flashing across every station. Throughout human space, hidden shipyards received the signal. Facilities built inside hollow moons powered up. Construction yards hidden in asteroid belts came online. Bases on rogue planets at the edge of the galaxy activated their quantum drives. For 150 years, humanity had been building. Not 200 ships, not 2,000. 500,000 dreadnoughts, each one larger and more powerful than anything the galaxy had ever seen. The greatest fleet in galactic history, built in secret, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the day when it would be needed. That day had finally arrived. Elena closed the communication and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Devourers were spreading their darkness across the galaxy. They thought they would consume everything, just as they had consumed 17 other galaxies before this one. But the Devourers had never encountered humanity before. They had never faced a species that had nearly destroyed itself countless times and learned from every mistake. They had never fought an enemy that understood that the only way to guarantee peace was to be prepared for total war. The galaxy thought humans were weak. In 72 hours, they would learn the truth, and the universe would never be the same. Sector 447 existed at the intersection of 12 major trade routes. It had been chosen as the staging area because its vast empty space could accommodate the largest fleet in galactic history. Or so the Council believed. They had calculated every detail. 105,000 warships would require precise coordination. The logistics alone were staggering. Commander Zarketh stood on the bridge of the Eternal Flame, the flagship of the Kaltesh Armada. Around him, 50,000 Kaltesh warships hung in formation, their red hulls gleaming in the light of distant stars. Each vessel was a masterpiece of military engineering. The smallest scout ship could level a city. The largest dreadnoughts could crack a planet's crust. The Kaltesh had been building warships for 10,000 years. They knew their craft, They knew their strength, and they knew that no other species in the galaxy could match them, except perhaps the Archeons, whose technology bordered on incomprehensible. The Archeon fleet materialized in waves of shimmering light. 30,000 vessels, each one a work of art as much as a weapon. Their hulls were composed of a crystalline material that could shift between solid and energy states. Their weapons manipulated gravity and time itself. The Archeons had existed for millions of years. They had forgotten more about warfare than most species would ever learn. Other fleets continued to arrive. The Iridian Collective's living ships, grown rather than built, pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. The Shorrock Alliance brought geometric vessels that moved in perfect synchronization. Dozens of smaller species contributed what they could. The combined armada was magnificent, terrifying, unstoppable. Commander Zarketh allowed himself a moment of pride. Whatever the Devourers were, they would not survive an encounter with this force. The galaxy would be saved and the Kaltesh would lead the victory. Then the alerts started, quantum signatures. Dozens of them. No, hundreds, appearing at the edge of the sector. The scout ships sent immediate reports. Unknown vessels emerging from fold space. Configuration unlike any registered design. Size reading seemed impossible. The sensors must be malfunctioning. Commander Zarketh demanded visual confirmation. The main view screen shifted to show the arrival zone. What he saw made his blood run cold despite the natural heat of his species. The human fleet had arrived. The first wave consisted of 50,000 ships. Each one was larger than the eternal flame. Their hulls were dark gray, almost black, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. They moved with impossible precision, their formation perfect despite the complexity of their arrival. They emerged from quantum fold gates, a technology that theoretically existed but had never been successfully implemented at scale. The communications channels exploded with confusion. The Kaltesh tactical officers reported impossibilities. The Archeon scientists frantically recalculated their sensors. The smaller species simply stared in disbelief. 50,000 human dreadnoughts. Where had they come from? How had they been built? Why had no one known? Then the second wave arrived. Another 50,000 ships. Then another wave. And another. The quantum fold gates kept opening, disgorging vessels that should not exist. The human fleet grew larger with each passing minute. 100,000. 200,000, 300,000. Commander Zarketh could not speak. His officers stood frozen at their stations. The Kaltesh had built 50,000 warships over the course of a century. It had been the largest military buildup in their history. They had been proud of that achievement. Humanity had built 500,000. The final count was staggering. 500,000 human dreadnoughts, each one a technological marvel that exceeded anything the galaxy had produced. They outnumbered the entire galactic fleet 5-1. The staging area that had been designed for 100,000 ships now struggled to accommodate 600,000. A communication request came through. Commander Zarketh accepted it automatically, still too stunned to think clearly. The view screen showed a human male, perhaps 60 years old by their reckoning. His uniform was simple but spoke of authority. Behind him, a bridge that stretched further than should be possible on any ship. Crew members worked at stations that bristled with technology the commander did not recognize. Fleet Admiral Marcus Chen introduced himself with quiet confidence. He commanded the human fleet. He had been preparing for this moment for 30 years. Before him, other admirals had prepared. Before them, the admirals before them. An unbroken chain of military leadership stretching back 150 years to the day humanity learned they were not alone. The admiral explained calmly. Humanity had studied the galaxy carefully. They had observed how species interacted. They had noted the constant wars, the political tensions, the barely restrained aggression. They had seen civilizations destroyed by enemies they were not prepared to face. Humans knew that pattern. They had lived it for thousands of years on their own planet. So humanity had made a choice. They would prepare. Not for conquest. Not for domination. For survival. For the day when preparation would make the difference between existence and extinction. They had built their fleet in secret. Hidden shipyards and asteroid belts where no one thought to look. Construction facilities on rogue planets drifting in the darkness between stars. Manufacturing stations inside hollow moons. The galaxy had seen Earth's small defensive fleet and assumed that was all humanity possessed. They had been meant to think that. Every ship had been designed with hard-earned lessons from human history. Redundant systems, rapid production capabilities, advanced weapons developed through centuries of theoretical research. Humanity had not wasted their time of peace. They had used it to prepare for war. The human doctrine was simple. Hope for peace, prepare for annihilation, never be caught unprepared again. Commander Zarketh finally found his voice. His question came out as barely more than a whisper. Why build such a massive fleet? Why hide it? Why pretend to be weak? Admiral Chen's expression grew distant. He spoke of Earth's history, the wars that had nearly destroyed them, the nuclear weapons that could have ended all life, the countless times humanity had stood at the brink of extinction through their own actions. They had learned, painfully and slowly, that strength must be tempered with wisdom, that power without restraint led to destruction. Humanity had hidden their strength because they needed to be certain they would only use it for the right reasons. They had waited for the moment when their power would save lives rather than take them. They had prepared in secret because revealing their capabilities too soon would have changed the political balance of the galaxy in unpredictable ways. Now that moment had arrived. The Devourers threatened every species, every world, every life in the galaxy. This was why humanity had prepared. This was what they had been waiting for. The communication ended. Commander Zarketh stood motionless, his mind struggling to process what he had witnessed. Around him, his bridge crew worked frantically to recalculate everything they thought they knew about military strategy. The tactical displays looked absurd now. The proud Kaltesh fleet, 50,000 strong, was nothing compared to the human armada. Luminary Sevquin contacted Commander Zarketh directly. The ancient Archeon had predicted something unusual, but even their vast experience had not prepared them for this revelation. The Archeons ran simulations constantly. They modeled possible futures. None of their predictions had included this scenario. Humanity had managed to hide the greatest military buildup in galactic history from species that had been observing the cosmos for millions of years. The luminary spoke with something that almost resembled respect. Humanity had achieved what should have been impossible. They had built a fleet that dwarfed every other military force combined. They had done it in secret, right under the nose of species with far more advanced technology. And they had maintained that secret for 150 years. The smaller species were terrified. If humanity could hide such power, what else might they be capable of? The Iridians sent urgent messages to their homeworld. The Shorok Alliance began recalculating their defensive postures. Everyone suddenly realized that the political balance of the galaxy had shifted irrevocably. But Commander Zarketh felt something unexpected. Not fear exactly, not anger, something closer to relief. The Devourers were coming. The galaxy faced extinction, and now, for the first time since the threat had been identified, he believed they might actually survive. The humans had been preparing for this. Every ship, every weapon, every tactical doctrine had been designed for this exact scenario. While other species built fleets for political posturing and territorial disputes, humanity had built theirs for one purpose: to fight an existential threat and win. Ambassador Elena Voss arrived at the staging area aboard a small diplomatic shuttle. She docked with the flagship Indomitable and made her way to the bridge. Admiral Chen greeted her with a slight smile. They had worked together for decades, coordinating the greatest secret in human history. Now that secret was revealed and the real work could begin. Elena looked out at the assembled fleet. 600,000 warships, the combined might of an entire galaxy ready to face the darkness. She thought about all the council sessions she had endured, all the condescending remarks. The Devourer Vanguard emerged from the darkness like a nightmare made real. 1 million bioships, each measuring over a mile in length. They were not built from metal or crystal like the ships of the galactic species. They were grown, living vessels that pulsed with malevolent energy. Their hulls absorbed scanner beams and twisted sensor readings. They moved through space like predators stalking prey. The Galactic Council's battle plan had been developed over weeks of intense debate. The strategy emphasized caution, measured responses, strategic retreats when necessary. The goal was to delay the Devourers while civilian populations evacuated from threatened worlds. Buy time, preserve forces, fall back to defensive positions. Admiral Marcus Chen reviewed the plan for exactly 30 seconds before rejecting it completely. Commander Zarketh watched the human fleet move into position. The Dreadnoughts advanced at full speed toward the Devourer vanguard. They were closing to engagement range far faster than tactical doctrine recommended. The Kaltesh tactical computers flashed warnings, collision alerts, proximity violations. The humans were charging directly at the enemy, with what could only be described as reckless abandon. Admiral Chen's voice came through on the fleet-wide communication channel. His tone was calm, almost conversational. He addressed not just his own fleet, but every ship in the combined armada. He spoke of humanity's history, the wars they had fought, the mistakes they had made, the lessons they had learned. Humanity had learned that some enemies could not be reasoned with, that some threats required immediate, overwhelming response. That hesitation in the face of extinction was just another form of surrender. The Devourers had consumed 17 galaxies. They would not be deterred by caution or clever tactics. They could only be stopped by force. The human fleet opened fire at what the galactic species considered impossible range. Quantum torpedoes that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, causality missiles that struck their targets before being fired, singularity cannons that created miniature black holes and directed them at enemy vessels, weapons that bent the rules of physics and rewrote the boundaries of possible warfare. The Devourer bioships died by the thousands. Their organic hulls offered no protection against weapons designed to exploit fundamental forces of the universe. They tried to adapt, shifting their molecular structure to resist the attacks. But human weapons adapted faster. Each salvo incorporated real-time analysis of enemy defenses and modified itself accordingly. The galactic fleet joined the assault. Kaltesh plasma cannons tore through Devourer formations. Archeon gravity weapons crushed bioships into impossible densities. Giridian living ships released swarms of fighters that attacked with coordinated precision. The combined firepower was devastating, but it was the human fleet that led the charge, that broke through enemy lines, that turned a defensive battle into an offensive slaughter. Then the casualties began. The Devourers were not defenseless. They struck back with weapons of their own, beams of dark energy that disintegrated matter at the molecular level, swarms of smaller organisms that attached to hulls and ate through armor, psychic attacks that drove crews to madness. The bioships adapted with terrifying speed, learning from each encounter, evolving their tactics in real time. Human dreadnoughts died, hundreds, then thousands. Their dark hulls cracked and split. Explosions blossomed in the void. Entire crews were lost in seconds. The casualty reports scrolled across Admiral Chen's screens faster than he could read them. 10,000 ships lost, 20,000, 30,000. Commander Zarketh watched in horror. The humans were losing ships at an unsustainable rate. Even with their massive numbers, they could not continue this assault much longer. He prepared to recommend a withdrawal. Better to save what forces remained than to sacrifice everything in a single battle. But Admiral Chen did not withdraw. He pushed forward. More ships moved into the battle. The human fleet absorbed losses that would have broken any other force and continued to advance. Their formation never wavered. Their fire never slackened. They fought with a calculated ferocity that shocked the galactic observers. The humans knew exactly what they were doing. Every ship lost had been accounted for in their tactical projections. Every casualty had been anticipated. This was not reckless courage. It was mathematics. Cold, brutal mathematics that weighed lives against survival and made the hard choices that other species were unwilling to make. Humanity had designed their ships to be produced rapidly. Automated shipyards could replace losses faster than any other species could comprehend. The dreadnoughts were crewed partially by AI systems, reducing the number of lives at risk while maintaining combat effectiveness. Humans had learned from their history. They knew the cost of victory and had prepared to pay it. The battle raged for 18 hours. The void became a graveyard of destroyed ships and shattered dreams. But slowly, inevitably, the tide turned. The Devourer vanguard began to break. Their adaptive capabilities could not keep pace with human weapons that evolved even faster. Their numbers, once overwhelming, diminished to dangerous levels. Their coordination, once perfect, fractured into chaos. When the last Devourer bioship was destroyed, silence fell across the battlefield. The galactic fleet had won, but the cost had been staggering. 50,000 human dreadnoughts destroyed, 15,000 ships from other species lost, billions of tons of debris floating in the void, and an unknown number of lives ended. Admiral Chen sat in his command chair, his face carved from stone. Around him, his bridge crew worked silently, processing casualty reports and coordinating rescue operations. The Indomitable had taken heavy damage but remained operational. They had been in the thick of the fighting. They had led from the front, as humans always did. Commander Zarketh requested a direct communication. When Admiral Chen appeared on his screen, the Kaltesh warrior saw something in the human's eyes that he recognized. Grief, the weight of command, the burden of sending others to their deaths for a greater purpose. Chen had lost 50,000 ships, hundreds of thousands of crew members, and he would do it again if necessary. The commander spoke with a respect he had never shown to humans before. He thanked Admiral Chen for his sacrifice. He acknowledged the brilliance of human tactics. He admitted that the Kaltesh, for all their warrior tradition, had never faced an enemy with such ruthless efficiency. Admiral Chen's response was simple. Ships could be replaced. Production facilities were already working at full capacity. Within months, the losses would be recovered. New dreadnoughts would emerge from hidden shipyards to replace those destroyed. The human military machine was designed for this kind of warfare. Designed to absorb catastrophic losses and continue fighting, but lives could not be replaced. Every person who died in that battle was irreplaceable. Every family that received notification of their loss would grieve forever. Admiral Chen carried those names in his memory. He would remember them all, yet he would make the same choice again, because the alternative was extinction. Not just for humanity, but for every species in the galaxy. The Devourers had to be stopped. Whatever the cost, whatever the sacrifice, that was the burden humanity had chosen to bear. Luminary Sev Quinn contacted the human flagship. The ancient Archeon had witnessed the battle with analytical precision. They had recorded every tactic, every weapon, every strategic decision. The humans had not simply won through superior numbers. They had won through superior doctrine, through a willingness to accept losses that other species would consider unthinkable, through an understanding of warfare that came from centuries of self-inflicted suffering. The Luminary asked a question that had been puzzling them since the human fleet first arrived. Why? Why build such a massive military force? Why develop such devastating weapons? Why prepare for a threat that might never come? Admiral Chen's answer was quiet but firm. Because humanity remembered what they had done to themselves. They remembered the wars that nearly destroyed their species. They remembered the times when preparation could have prevented disaster, but did not exist. They had learned, painfully and slowly, that the only way to guarantee survival was to be ready for the worst possible scenario. Hope for peace. Prepare for annihilation. It was not just a motto. It was humanity's fundamental philosophy. And it had just saved the galaxy. The combined fleet began repairs and reorganization. The Devourer Vanguard had been destroyed, but it was only the first wave. More would come. Larger forces. More adaptive enemies. The war had just begun. But for the first time since the threat was identified, the galactic species believed they could win, because humanity had shown them how, not through arrogance or aggression, but through cold, calculated preparation, through a willingness to sacrifice for the greater good, through strength tempered by hard-won wisdom. The galaxy had thought humans were weak. They had been wrong. But more than that, they had misunderstood what strength truly meant. It was not about conquest or domination. It was about standing between extinction and survival and refusing to yield. It was about paying any price to protect not just your own species, but every species, every world, every life worth saving. That was humanity's gift to the galaxy. Not just their fleet or their weapons or their tactics. 6 months had passed since the first victory. 6 months of constant warfare across the Outer Rim. The Devourers had learned from their initial defeat. They no longer sent simple vanguard forces. Their attacks became more coordinated, more strategic, more deadly. The galactic fleet fought battle after battle, winning some, losing others. The war settled into a grinding stalemate. Then the Devourers changed their strategy completely. The warning came too late. 2 million Devourer bioships emerged from fold space at the edge of the Sol system, not at the front lines where the human fleet was deployed, not at the Outer Rim where defenses were strongest, but at Earth itself. A decapitation strike designed to destroy humanity's homeworld and break the spirit of the species that had proven to be the greatest threat to the Devourer. Swarmed out Admiral Chen received the alert while coordinating operations 300 light-years from home. His blood turned to ice as the tactical display updated. 2 million bioships. Earth had only 75,000 dreadnoughts in defensive positions. The rest of the fleet was scattered across the galaxy, defending council worlds and protecting trade routes. There was no time to recall them. No time to mount a proper defense. Earth was about to face the largest assault in human history, and they would face it alone. But humanity had not spent 150 years preparing for war only to leave their homeworld defenseless. As the Devourer fleet approached, Earth's hidden defenses activated. Systems that no other species knew existed. Weapons that had been built in absolute secrecy and never revealed even to humanity's closest allies. The moon was not just Earth's natural satellite. It was a fortress. Beneath its cratered surface, mass driver cannons capable of accelerating projectiles to relativistic speeds came online. The weapons had been installed over decades, carved into the lunar bedrock where no scanner could detect them. They fired in perfect synchronization, sending streams of destruction into the approaching Devourer fleet. Mars had been humanity's first colony. It was also their first fortress. The entire planet was ringed with weapons platforms disguised as terraforming stations. Particle beam arrays that could vaporize targets across millions of miles. Missile batteries that launched warheads by the thousands. Defense networks controlled by artificial intelligences that had been designed for a single purpose: protect the homeworld at any cost. The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter was not a natural formation. Humanity had seeded it with autonomous weapons platforms over the course of a century. Thousands upon thousands of defensive nodes, each one capable of independent action, each one programmed to destroy anything that threatened Earth. They activated as a swarm, moving with coordinated precision to intercept the Devourer advance. Earth itself was shielded by a planetary defense grid that made the Council's most advanced systems look primitive. Energy barriers that could absorb planet-killing impacts. Point defense networks that could track and destroy thousands of targets simultaneously. Ground-based weapons that reached into space with fingers of fire and lightning. The solar defense network had been humanity's greatest secret. Greater even than the Dreadnought fleet, every human colony, every orbital station, every asteroid mining facility had contributed to its construction. They had built their defense in plain sight, disguised as civilian infrastructure, hidden among the legitimate activities of a spacefaring civilization. The Devourers encountered resistance unlike anything they had experienced. They died in their thousands, then their tens of thousands, but they kept coming. 2 million bioships against 75,000 defenders and whatever fixed defenses Earth could muster. The mathematics were brutal and unforgiving. Human dreadnoughts formed defensive shells around Earth and its colonies. They fought with desperate creativity, using the gravity wells of planets and moons to their advantage. They sacrificed themselves in suicide runs to break enemy formations. They held positions that should have been abandoned and defended space that should have been yielded, because behind them were 11 billion human lives, the cradle of their species, the world they could not afford to lose. Then help arrived from an unexpected source. Commander Zarketh had been defending a Kaltesh border world when the alert came through. Earth was under attack. Humanity, which had saved the galaxy 6 months ago, now faced extinction. The commander made his decision in seconds. He abandoned his defensive position and ordered his fleet to fold space to the Sol system. 20,000 Kaltesh warships, disobeying direct orders from their high command, rushing to save a species they had once dismissed as weak. Luminary Sev Quinn had been conducting research on Devourer biology when the news reached them. The ancient Archeon contacted every Archeon vessel within range and issued a command that surprised even their own people: save the humans. The species that had hidden such power might be the key to ultimate victory. Losing them would doom the galaxy. 10,000 Archeon ships abandoned their posts and converged on Earth. Smaller species followed. The Iridians sent 5,000 living ships. The Shorrock Alliance dispatched 3,000 geometric vessels. Even species that had minimal contact with humanity sent what forces they could spare. Earth had stood for the galaxy. Now the galaxy would stand for Earth. The battle became chaos. Ships from 100 species fought side by side against the Devourer swarm. Kaltesh warriors coordinated with human tactical officers. Archeon scientists shared forbidden technologies to strengthen human shields. Iridian ships merged their consciousness with human AIs to create hybrid tactical networks that predicted enemy movements with unprecedented accuracy. The moon cracked under sustained bombardment. Its mass drivers fell silent one by one as Devourer bioships crashed into the lunar surface. Mars burned, its atmosphere stripped away by dark energy beams, its fortress stations destroyed. The asteroid belt's defensive platforms died by the thousands. Earth's planetary shields flickered and failed in sections, but the line held. Barely, at terrible cost. But it held. Admiral Chen arrived with the recalled elements of the human fleet. 300,000 dreadnoughts emerged from fold space and threw themselves into the battle with suicidal fury. They had left their posts defending other worlds. They had abandoned council species to save their own. It went against every principle that guided human doctrine. But Earth was more than just another planet. It was home. The Admiral stood on the bridge of the Indomitable and watched his homeworld burn. Parts of Earth's surface were visible through gaps in the defensive grid. Cities in flames, oceans boiling, continents scarred by impacts, billions of lives at stake. And he could not save them all. No one could. The only choice was how many would survive. Then he made the hardest decision of his life. He activated Protocol Omega, the weapon humanity had sworn never to use, the ultimate expression of their capacity for destruction, refined and directed by centuries of theoretical research. A controlled singularity bomb that would collapse the Devourer fleet's ability to fold through dimensions. The weapon was deployed at the edge of the Sol system. For a moment, nothing happened. Then space itself screamed. The singularity expanded in ways that violated every law of physics. It did not pull matter toward itself like a normal black hole. Instead, it reached out with invisible fingers and tore at the dimensional fabric that the Devourers used to travel and coordinate. The Devourer bioships lost cohesion. Their swarm intelligence fractured as dimensional connections severed. Individual ships suddenly found themselves isolated, unable to adapt or coordinate. They became targets instead of threats. The combined galactic fleet tore through them with renewed fury. The battle turned. Slowly at first, then with gathering momentum. The Devourers began to retreat, then to flee. The survivors scattered into deep space, their coordination broken, their advantage lost. The siege of Earth was over. The cost had been catastrophic. The moon was ruined, its surface cracked and bleeding atmosphere from the hollow spaces beneath. Mars was uninhabitable, its terraforming set back by centuries. The asteroid belt's defensive network was destroyed. Earth itself had taken damage that would take generations to repair. 4 billion humans were dead. Entire cities had been vaporized. Coastal regions had been swept away by tsunamis caused by ocean impacts. But Earth survived. Humanity survived, and the galaxy had learned what it truly meant to stand together. Commander Zarketh met with Admiral Chen on the surface of Earth, in the ruins of what had once been a great city. The Kaltesh warrior looked at the devastation around them and felt something he had never experienced before. Not pity exactly, something deeper. Kinship. The humans had lost billions but still stood ready to fight. They had seen their homeworld burned but had not broken. They were warriors in a way the Kaltesh had never truly understood. Luminary Sevquin arrived as well, their crystalline form dimmed with exhaustion. The ancient Archeon had expended resources they could never recover to save Earth. They regretted nothing. Humanity had proven something that Sevquin had suspected since their fleet first appeared. The humans were not just another species. They were the key to survival. Their willingness to sacrifice, their capacity for both destruction and restraint, their understanding that true strength came from protecting others rather than conquering them. 2 years had passed since the siege of Earth. The Galactic Council chambers had been rebuilt, larger and more inclusive than before. Representatives from every species sat in equal sections now. The old hierarchy of power had been swept away by the shared experience of survival. When you had fought side by side against extinction, old prejudices seemed foolish. The Devourers had been pushed back to the galactic rim. They were not destroyed, not completely, but they were contained. The combined fleet maintained constant patrols, preventing any breakthrough attempts. Occasional skirmishes still occurred, but the tide had turned decisively. The swarm that had consumed 17 galaxies had been stopped. The cost had been staggering, Humanity had lost 320,000 dreadnoughts over the course of the war. 4 billion humans had died, most during the siege of Earth. Other species had suffered similar losses. The Galactic Empire had been reduced by a third. The Archeons had expended resources they would take millennia to recover. Dozens of smaller civilizations had been devastated, but they had survived. And in surviving, they had become something new. Ambassador Elena Voss stood at the central platform of the council chambers. Her hair had gone gray during the war years. Her face bore scars from the siege of Earth, where she had coordinated planetary defenses while the world burned around her. But her eyes remained sharp, focused, determined. The council had voted unanimously to offer humanity a seat on the High Council. Not out of fear, though humanity's military power commanded respect. Not out of gratitude, though humanity had sacrificed more than any other species, but because the galaxy had learned what humans had always known. That strength meant nothing without the wisdom to use it properly. That power was only valuable if it protected rather than conquered. Elena accepted the position on behalf of Earth and all its colonies. But she also made a proposal that would reshape the galaxy forever. Humanity would share their shipbuilding technology. Every species would be taught how to construct dreadnoughts. The automated production systems, the advanced weapons, the defensive networks, everything that humanity had developed in secret would become common knowledge. The chamber erupted into debate. Some species welcomed the offer immediately. Others were suspicious. Why would humanity give away their greatest advantage? What was the real motivation behind such apparent generosity? Elena explained patiently. Humanity had built their fleet in secret because they needed to be certain they would use it responsibly. They had hidden their strength to avoid tempting themselves into using it for conquest. But the war had proven something important. The galaxy could be trusted. When faced with extinction, species that had been enemies for centuries had set aside their differences. They had fought together, bled together, sacrificed together. That unity was precious. More valuable than any weapon or technology. But it needed to be strengthened and preserved. The best way to do that was to ensure every species could defend itself and contribute to collective defense. No species should ever again face extinction because they lacked the tools to fight back. No world should burn because its defenders were unprepared. The Galactic Defense Initiative was born from that vision. Every species would contribute ships, technology, and personnel to a unified fleet, not to replace national militaries, but to supplement them. A force that answered to the Council as a whole rather than any individual power. A fleet designed not for conquest but for protection, for ensuring that what happened during the Devourer War would never happen again. Commander Zarketh spoke in support of the initiative. The Kaltesh had learned hard lessons during the war. Their warrior culture had valued strength above all else. But humanity had shown them a different kind of strength. The strength to prepare without attacking, to possess overwhelming power and choose restraint, to stand in defense of others rather than in conquest of them. The commander had changed during the war. He no longer spoke with arrogance or looked down on other species. He had stood on the ruins of Earth and seen what real sacrifice looked like. He had watched human defenders give their lives to protect worlds they had never visited. He had learned that true warriors fought for others, not for glory. Luminary Sevquin provided the Archeon perspective. The ancient species had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. They had seen empires built on conquest crumble into dust. They had watched peaceful societies torn apart by unprepared enemies. The balance was difficult to achieve. Too much military power led to aggression. Too little led to extinction. Humanity had found that balance. They had built overwhelming force and then chosen not to use it until absolutely necessary. They had prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. They had created weapons of terrible destruction, and then placed them in service of protection rather than conquest. That wisdom was worth more than any technology. The vote was not unanimous. Some species feared that spreading military technology would lead to new wars. Others worried about the cost of maintaining such a massive defensive force. But the majority understood. The Devourers had been stopped, but they were not the only threat in the universe. There would be other dangers, other existential challenges. The galaxy needed to be ready. Admiral Marcus Chen stood on the observation deck of the rebuilt Indomitable and watched the first Joint Fleet exercise. Human dreadnoughts flying in formation with Kaltesh warships and Archeon science vessels. Huridian living ships coordinating with Shorok geometric craft. Ships from 100 species working together as a unified force. His hair had gone completely white during the war. His body bore scars from the battles he had fought. He had given 30 years of his life to preparing for a threat he prayed would never come, and when it did come, he had paid the price in full. 320,000 ships destroyed, hundreds of thousands of lives lost. His own homeworld scarred beyond recognition, but Earth had survived. Humanity had survived. And more than that, they had helped save the galaxy, not through conquest or domination, but through preparation and sacrifice. Through the willingness to stand between extinction and survival when others could not. The Admiral's mission was complete. Protocol Dawn had been activated. The fleet had been revealed. The war had been fought and won. Now it was time for the next generation to take over. Young officers who had been trained in the fires of actual combat rather than simulations. Leaders who understood both the power they commanded and the responsibility that came with it. Admiral Chen submitted his retirement papers the next day. He had served humanity for 3 decades. He had built the greatest fleet in galactic history and led it through the most desperate war imaginable. He had earned his rest. The politicians tried to convince him to stay, but he declined politely. New times required new leadership. His time had passed. Before he left, Commander Zarketh invited him for a drink. They met in a reconstructed bar in Geneva, a city that had been destroyed during the siege and rebuilt over 2 years of constant work. They sat and talked about war and peace, about preparation and restraint, about the burden of command and the cost of survival. The Kaltesh warrior asked the question that had been bothering him since the human fleet first appeared. Why had humanity hidden their strength? What was the real reason behind such elaborate secrecy? Admiral Chen's answer was simple. Because humanity remembered what they had done to themselves. They had nearly destroyed their own species multiple times before learning to control their destructive capabilities. They had seen what happened when military power was pursued without wisdom. When strength was valued above restraint. When weapons were built for pride rather than protection. Humanity wanted to be certain they would only use their power for the right reasons. So they built their fleet in secret and waited. They watched the galaxy and learned its ways. They prepared for the worst while hoping it would never come. And when the moment finally arrived, when the choice had to be made, they were ready to do what was necessary. That was humanity's gift to the galaxy. Not just their technology or their weapons or their tactical brilliance, but the lesson that power restrained was power preserved. That true strength came from knowing when not to use force rather than knowing how to use it. That survival required both the capability to fight and the wisdom to know when fighting was truly necessary. Commander Zarketh understood. The Kaltesh had valued martial prowess for 10,000 years, but they had never truly understood what it meant to be warriors. Humanity had shown them. Warriors fought to protect, not to conquer. Warriors prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. Warriors stood between their people and extinction and refused to yield no matter the cost. They raised their glasses in a toast. To survival, to sacrifice, to the hard-won wisdom that came from facing extinction and refusing to accept it, to the future that they had fought so hard to preserve. Earth slowly healed. New cities rose from the ruins of the old. The moon's surface was repaired, its mass drivers rebuilt and improved. Mars began the long process of re-terraforming. The asteroid belt's defensive network was reconstructed, stronger and more sophisticated than before. Humanity's production capacity had been proven during the war. Now it was turned toward rebuilding and strengthening,